Hello, and welcome back to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and we are plotting on our expression tool expedition. We're looking at the expression designer again, the playback functions, and I think this is the last part of that. And we're going to start looking at some of the playback functions that specifically have to do with changing sounds and stuff like that. So there's a few of them, so this shouldn't be too bad, I think. The first one we're going to start with is channel. And it's right here in the type, about 5 or 6 down. And with the channel type, the set to value can be any number between 1 and 128, because there's 128 channels available in Finale. Now, those channels themselves refer to a couple places in the program. So I'm opening the score manager here, looking at the instruments here, and on the right-hand side, you'll see 2 columns here for bank and channel. So in this case, the flute is set to bank 1, channel 1. In the audio units, banks, and effects window, you'll see the ARIA player, and there's 8 different banks here, 1 through 8. And each one of these banks, if you open up the pencil here, if you press the pencil, you'll get the ARIA player, which will give you 16 different channels, which you can see right here, and there's slots for all these instruments. The weird thing about the way Finale handles this is that you can see on the left-hand side here, bank 1 is channel 1 through 16, bank 2 is 17 through 32, 3 is etc., and then bank 8 is 113 through 128. Those larger numbers refer to the channel that you would use in that expression playback channel function. It's weird, though, because if you open up the ARIA player, this says 1 to 16, but even if I open up the second one, which it should be 17 to 32, it still says 1 through 16. So there's a little bit of math that goes on in this regard. And even in the score manager, if you have something set to bank 2, it would reset to channel 1. So here I've got something bank 2 and it says channel 1. It doesn't say channel 17. So again, there's a little bit of a confusion there, but that's how that works. And as far as it's related to the channel playback, this is a whole value that goes from 1 to 128, right? And so the usefulness of this is, if you really want to do it this way, you can actually change sounds like this. So in this first staff here, I have the flute channel 1 setting, and this one is set to playback channel 16, as you can see. The trick to this is that unless you set up a sound on channel 16, nothing's going to happen. If I were to play this back right now, all you'd hear is actually you'd hear flute, and then you'd hear nothing in that second measure, and then back to flute. So you do have to go back to the audio units, banks, and effects window, edit the ARIA player, and manually add that sound to slot 16, which we'll do right now. We'll just choose woodwinds, clarinets, B-flat clarinet player 1, and now you can see there's something in that. So now if we play, we will actually hear the change from flute to clarinet right here. So this is a way to change the sound in Finale. Now, this is not a good way, I would say, because we do have the utilities change instrument function, which is much better because not only will it change the sound, it will also change the transposition and the staff label as well. So this is sort of a function of a bygone era with Finale, where you would actually have to use that channel change in order to change the sound, and then you'd have to do something with the transposition and the staff label and everything. It was old days of the Wild West of Finale, but thankfully it's a lot easier now. So it doesn't really have a lot of practical purposes in a scenario like this. However, I do think it is sometimes useful for situations like this where you have keyboards. Actually, I should have probably called this keyboard 1 instead of piano 1. Where you have keyboards where you have different patches being played. So in that case, what you can do is set up different channels for your different sounds. So I've got, in this case, I've got the piano set to channel 6, which is what it would be by default, harpsichord 7, and then strings in 8. And again, I had to go into the ARIA player and manually add these, because before I did this, 7 and 8 would have been listed as empty, right? So I did have to go and choose those sounds from here. But once you do, you should hear those sounds in succession. Now, there's another neat thing that you can do with keyboards if you want to get a little bit fancier, is you can actually start to separate the hands with different sounds. Now, in this second keyboard part here, what I have here is set up some different sounds that get applied to different hands, and even different layers in the left hand here. As you can see, what I ultimately want is the strings on the layer 1 and the timpani on layer 2. Now, this requires a little bit of manipulating. First of all, I've intentionally put the piano 2 part here into bank 2, which is why it's starting the channel 17. And I also have 2 channels set to the piano. So the trick to this is I'm going to pull up the score manager and show you what's going on with piano 2. And you'll see where it says sound, it says mixed, and there's nothing listed for bank channel. The reason for that is that if you open up the triangle, you'll get some further information about each staff. Now, in the right hand, I didn't change anything, so what you have here is bank 2, channel 1, which is, of course, channel 17, or GER. In the left hand, it still says mixed, and the reason why it's mixed is because if you open that triangle, we actually have control over the different layers. And in this case, what I did was I chose, I selected layer 2 here and just changed the channel to 4. Now, it's still showing Steinway piano here, but channel 4 is set to a different sound in the aria player, but Finale just doesn't know what to do with calling this a sound, because those aria player sounds are sort of temporary when we get to it, right? So the ultimate point of this, though, is that in order to get the sounds to separate out like that, you do have to have these set to mixed. And I could also have done this with the top hand of the piano as well. If I had changed one of the layers to a different channel, the top hand would also say mixed, where I'm pointing right here as well. But it doesn't matter. In this case, I just want the left hand to have layers mixed and the piano on a whole to be mixed. Now, if you think about it, there's a good reason for this, because in that first example, I have only one expression, and you can see that it's affecting the entire piano part, both parts, or both hands and all layers, right? Which is more often than not what you want to do. If you need to separate them out like this, now you actually have to use multiple expressions on each staff. So otherwise, it would only change one staff. So that's why I have a piano on channel 17 and a piano on channel 18 for the left hand here, right? And then when we change to this harpsichord, it's only going to play the right hand on the harpsichord, but the piano will remain here. And then the third bar, I've got it switched around, so piano on top, harpsichord on bottom. And then again with the last 2 measures here, I've got layer 1 set to strings and layer 2 set to timpani. Now, the trick about this is that when you do apply these expressions, if you're applying it to the entire staff, this is the expression assignment, so shift double click, where it says on playback affect current layer. That just really means all the layers in the staff. But with these expressions where you're trying to separate them out, what you need to do is set that one to layer 1. You can see that right there. And then the timpani in this case, to on playback affect layer 2. So now only layer 2 will change to timpani, whereas layer 1 will change to strings, right? So, and when we play this back, this should be right. Let me zoom out because it's going to go away. There we go. And let's try this. There's the piano. All right, so you can see how that works, and then so it's a little tricky to set up, but if you can get it right, it's kind of a nifty way to do patch changes for keyboard instruments in this regard. All right, so that is the channel functions for playback. Now I'm going to pull up a different file here. And this is a very similar file to the one I had. I actually just copied it. But the main difference is that in the MIDI audio menu here, I have play finale through MIDI selected as opposed to through audio units. And when you do that, you may know that your sound set is now going to be the Smart Music soft synth versus the Garriton instruments or any other VST that you may have in your system. So when you have the play finale through MIDI checked, what you have to do now is use patches instead of channels, because Finale doesn't recognize channels with the MIDI setup here. So we're using patches instead. And it works very similarly, though, except for that when you choose, this is channel, you don't see any of this information here. When you choose patch, it will give you a whole bunch of different information that you can use. The easiest thing is to just switch the sound in the GM. But if you are using like external devices or something, you may have to choose one of these other options and send it to a certain core MIDI place or whatever. So it can get a little bit more complicated when you're starting to use external sounds. But if you're just using the smart music sounds with the play finale through MIDI checked, this is really all you have to do is just choose the GM sound. So in this case, I have it set to patch 74, which is the flute. And for the clarinet, it should be set to patch 72 clarinet, right? And you'll get the same result with the other sound set, of course. And then the same thing with the keyboards. The principle is exactly the same as far as separating the hands and the different layers and everything. The principle is exactly the same within the score manager. Stop, please. Except, obviously, the difference is you're using these MIDI sounds as opposed to the audio unit sounds, as is the Garrison Orchestra. All right, let me go back to my other file. So let me talk about two more things that we have remaining in the playback portion of the Expression Designer. The first is the Percussion MIDI Map, and when you choose this option here, the Set to Value field goes away, and you can actually choose one of the Percussion MIDI Maps. Now, here's the thing with the Percussion MIDI Maps. If you don't know much about Percussion MIDI Maps, this is sort of a exercise in futility using that expression playback type. But the MIDI map itself can be found if you're in the score manager and you have the percussion selected and you see percussion notation style and press settings. This will be the percussion layout selection dialog box. Now there's a difference between layout and MIDI map. And if you edit a given percussion layout, you will see that the percussion layout gets assigned to a percussion MIDI map. And you can actually choose a different MIDI map to go with that layout. Now it's a lot of lots of layers of percussion going on here, but essentially the MIDI map is telling you what keyboard notes get assigned to what sounds. The percussion layout is telling you what sounds get applied to what staff spaces and with what note heads, etc. So, and then of course once you've gotten that chosen, you can choose the notation style for that percussion layout to apply it to that staff. So you can see the sort of multiple layers of that. All this is to say is that if you were to try to edit the percussion MIDI map in the Expression Designer here and try and choose a different device or a different MIDI map here, it's not really going to do what you think because you're only changing the underlying map. You're not changing the layout, and you're not changing how that layout is applied to the staff necessarily. So just changing the percussion MIDI map like this is really not going to do you much good. The only reason to ever use this is if you're using third-party VSTs and you're sort of making your own custom percussion MIDI maps and layouts and everything, it would be possible to have a percussion layout that could use different MIDI maps. If that's the case, then it would be possible to switch MIDI maps midstream using this playback functionality. Now, this is like highly, highly advanced, and you really have to have some complicated setups with your percussion layout and your percussion MIDI maps. So, again, this is like beyond advanced for percussion playback. All this is to say is that, again, with the utilities change instrument, this makes everything happen all at once. It changes the staff style if it needs to. It changes the percussion layout and the map that goes with that percussion layout. So, again, 99.99% of the time, there's really absolutely no reason to use the percussion MIDI map playback functionality in that regard. But if you need to, that's the theory behind it. And then finally, one more thing. The last thing we need to look at in the playback type is dump. There's an option here sort of towards the bottom middle here called dump. Now, this is a very technical box that comes up. And unless you're a MIDI programmer, there's absolutely no reason to do this. But what this would do if you needed it to, number one, if you're using an external MIDI device to play back with, you could theoretically send the data on any given staff to more than one MIDI channel, and this is how you would do that by changing the number of units. I think you can have up to 3 at a time, so if you set this number to 3, it will send on 3 different MIDI channels. And then as far as data is concerned, this is for, specific MIDI dump data, controller data, or whatever it is. I don't even understand the format of this MIDI data. So again, unless you're a MIDI programmer that really knows what you're doing, there's no reason to use this. But what this does is if you have a expression with a dump value, and once you get to that point, it will dump that value to whatever external device you have, and you can go on your merry way. That's exactly what that does. All right, so I think that covers everything in the playback portion of the Expression Designer. It was a lot, I know, but hopefully you've learned a little bit. Hopefully you've learned a lot. I know I have learned a lot trying to figure all this stuff out, as much of this stuff I don't even use on a day-to-day basis, so it was fun for me. I hope it was fun for you. All right, so thanks for watching, and come back and we'll look at a few more things having to do with expressions. All right, thanks, and I'll see you then.